Welcome to the Quiet Corner Bedtime Stories. I'm Annie, and along with my co-host Eamon, we're here to share our favourite classic stories, accompanied by soothing music to help you relax, unwind, and drift off into a peaceful night's sleep. If you enjoy our stories, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast platform. You can also support us on Lenny FM along with some of your other favourite podcasts, or make a donation to Ko-Fi, kofi.com, so we can continue to share these classic stories with you all. Thank you for all your support and sweet dreams. Tonight I'll be continuing 8 Cousins by Louisa May Alcott. In the previous chapter, Rose embraced the holiday spirit with her family. From the shared delight of stockings with Phoebe to skating lessons and sledding adventures. There was a festive dinner, a heartwarming family reunion when Uncle Jem arrived back home, and joyful dances under the mistletoe. And now it's time to relax. Close your eyes and forget about all your worries from the day as you snuggle up and listen to tonight's story. Chapter 21. A Scare. Brother Alec, you surely don't mean to allow this child to go out such a bitter cold day as this, said Aunt Myra, looking into the study where the doctor sat reading his paper one February morning. Why not, especially as she is dressed for cold weather, answered Dr. Alec with provoking confidence. But you have no idea how sharp the wind is. I am chilled to the very marrow of my bones, answered Aunt Myra, chafing the end of her purple nose with her sombre glove. I don't doubt it, ma'am, if you will wear crepe and silk instead of fur and flannel. Rosie goes out in all weathers and will be none the worse for an hour's brisk skating. Well, I warn you that you are trifling with the child's health and depending too much on the seeming improvement she has made this year. She is a delicate creature for all that, and will drop away suddenly at the first serious attack, just as her poor mother did, croaked Aunt Myra with a despondent wag of the big bonnet. I'll risk it, answered Dr. Alec, knitting his brows as he always did when any allusion was made to that other Rose. Mark my words, you will repent it. And with that awful prophecy, Aunt Myra departed like a black shadow. Now, it must be confessed that among the doctor's failings, and he had his share, was a very masculine dislike of advice which was thrust upon him unasked. He always listened with respect to the great aunts, and often consulted Aunt Jessie, but the other 3 ladies tried his patience sorely by constant warnings, complaints, and counsels. Aunt Myra was an especial trial, and he always turned contrary the moment she began to talk. He could not help it, and often laughed about it with comic frankness. Here now was a sample of it, for he had just been thinking that Rose had better defer her run till the wind went down and the sun was warmer. But Aunt Myra spoke, and he could not resist the temptation to make light of her advice and let Rose brave the cold. I hope the child won't stay out long, for this wind is enough to chill the marrow in younger bones than Myra's, thought Dr. Alec half an hour later, as he drove toward the city to see the few patients he had consented to take for the sake of old acquaintance. The thought returned several times that morning, for it was truly a bitter day, and in spite of his bearskin coat, the doctor shivered, but he had great faith in Rose's good sense, and it never occurred to him that she was making a little Casabianca of herself, with the difference of freezing instead of burning at her post. You see, Mac had made an appointment to meet her at a certain spot and have a grand skating bout as soon as the few lessons he was allowed were over. She had promised to wait for him and did so with a faithfulness that cost her dear, because Mac forgot his appointment when the lessons were done and became absorbed in a chemical experiment till a general combustion of gases drove him out of his laboratory. Then he suddenly remembered Rose and would gladly have hurried away to her, but his mother forbade his going out, for the sharp wind would hurt his eyes. "She will wait and wait, Mother, for she always keeps her word, and I told her to hold on till I came," explained Mac, with visions of a shivering little figure watching on the windy hilltop. "Of course your uncle won't let her go out such a day as this. If he does, she will have the sense to come here for you, or to go home again when you don't appear," said Aunt Jane, returning to her what's on the mind. "I wish Steve would just cut up and see if she's there, since I can't go," said Mac anxiously. "Steve won't stir a peg, thank you. He's got his own toes to thaw out and wants his dinner," answered Dandy, just in from school and wrestling impatiently with his boots. So Mac resigned himself, and Rose waited dutifully till dinner time, assured that her waiting was in vain. She had done her best to keep warm, and had skated till she was tired and hot, then stood watching others till she was chilled, tried to get up a glow again by trotting up and down the road, but failed to do so, and finally cuddled disconsolately under a pine tree to wait and watch. When she at length started for home, she was benumbed with the cold. Dr. Alec was basking in the warmth of his study fire after his drive, when the sound of a stifled sob made him hurry to the door and look anxiously into the hall. Rose lay in a shivering bunch near the register, with her things half off, wringing her hands and trying not to cry with the pain returning warmth brought to her half-frozen fingers. "My darling, what is it?" And Uncle Alec had her in his arms in a minute. "Mac didn't come. I can't get warm. The fire makes me ache." And with a long shiver, Rose burst out crying, while her teeth chattered and her poor little nose was so blue it made one's heart ache to see it. In less time than it takes to tell it, Dr. Alec had her on the sofa, rolled up in the bearskin coat, with Phoebe rubbing her cold feet, while he rubbed the aching hands, and Aunt Plenty made a comfortable hot drink, and Aunt Peace sent down her own foot warmer and embroidered blanket. Full of remorseful tenderness, Uncle Alec worked over his new patient till she declared she was all right again. He would not let her get up to dinner, but fed her himself, and then forgot his own while he sat watching her fall into a drowse, for Aunt Plenty's cordial made her sleepy. She lay so several hours, for the drowse deepened into a heavy sleep, and Uncle Alec, still at his post, saw with growing anxiety that a feverish colour began to burn in her cheeks. Her breathing was quick and uneven, and now and then she gave a little moan as if in pain. Suddenly she woke up with a start, and seeing Aunt Plenty bending over her, put out her arms like a sick child, saying wearily, "Please, could I go to bed?" "The best place for you, dearie. Take her right up, Alec. I've got the hot water ready, and after a nice bath she shall have a cup of my sage tea and be rolled up in blankets to sleep off her cold," answered the old lady as she bustled away to give orders. "Are you in pain, darling?" asked Uncle Alec as he carried her up. "My side aches when I breathe, and I feel stiff and queer, but it isn't so bad, so don't be troubled, Uncle. whispered Rose with a little hot hand against his cheek. But the poor doctor did look troubled, and had cause to do so, for just then Rose tried to laugh at Debbie charging into the room with a warming pan, but could not, for a sharp pain took her breath away and made her cry out. "Pleurisy," sighed Aunt Plenty from the depths of the bathtub. "Pneumonia," groaned Debbie, burrowing among the bedclothes with the long-handled pan as if bent on fishing up that treacherous disease. "Oh, is it bad?" asked Phoebe, nearly dropping a pail of hot water in her dismay, for she knew nothing of sickness, and Debbie's suggestion had a peculiarly dreadful sound to her. "Hush," ordered the doctor in a tone that silenced all further predictions and made everyone work with a will. "Make her as comfortable as you can, and when she is in her little bed, I'll come and say good night," he added, when the bath was ready and the blankets browning nicely before the fire. Then he went away to talk quite cheerfully to Aunt Peace about its being only a chill, after which he tramped up and down the hall, pulling his beard and knitting his brows, sure signs of great inward perturbation. "I thought it would be too good luck to get through the year without a downfall. Why couldn't I take Myra's advice and keep Rose at home? It's not fair that the poor child should suffer for my sinful overconfidence. She shall not suffer for it. Pneumonia indeed, I defy it." And he shook his fist in the ugly face of an Indian idol that happened to be before him. In spite of his defiance, his heart sank when he saw Rose again, for the pain was worse, and the bath and blankets, the warming pan and piping hot sage tea were all in vain. For several hours there was no rest for the poor child, and all manner of gloomy forebodings haunted the minds of those who hovered about her with faces full of the tenderest anxiety. In the midst of the worst, Charlie came to leave a message from his mother and was met by Phoebe coming despondently downstairs with a mustard plaster that had brought no relief. "What the dickens is the matter? You look as dismal as a tombstone," he said as she held up her hand to stop his lively whistling. "Miss Rose is dreadful sick." "The deuce she is." "Don't swear, Mr. Charlie, she really is, and it's Mr. Mac's fault." And Phoebe told the sad tale in a few sharp words, for she felt at war with the entire race of boys at that moment. "I'll give it to him, make your mind easy about that," said Charlie, with an ominous doubling up of his fist. "But Rose isn't dangerously ill, is she?" he added anxiously, as Aunt Plenty was seen to trot across the upper hall, shaking a bottle violently as she went. "Oh, but she is, though. The doctor don't say much, but he don't call it a chill anymore. It's pleurisy now. I'm so afraid it will be pneumonia tomorrow," with a despairing glance at the plaster. Charlie exploded into a stifled laugh at the new pronunciation of pneumonia, to Phoebe's great indignation. "How can you have the heart to do it, and she is in such horrid pain? Hark to that, and then laugh if you darest," she said with a tragic gesture, with her black eyes full of fire. Charlie listened and heard little moans that went to his heart and made his face as sober as Phoebe's. "Oh, Uncle, please stop the pain and let me rest a minute. Don't tell the boys I wasn't brave. I try to bear it, but it's so sharp I can't help crying." Neither could Charlie when he heard the broken voice say that. But boylike he wouldn't own it, and said pettishly as he rubbed his sleeve across his eyes, "Don't hold that confounded thing under my nose. That mustard makes my eyes smart." Don't see how it can, when it hasn't any more strength in it than meal. The doctor said so, and I'm going to get some better, began Phoebe, not a bit ashamed of the great tears that were bedewing the condemned plaster. I'll go, and Charlie was off like a shot, glad of an excuse to get out of sight for a few minutes. When he came back, all inconvenient emotion had been disposed of, and having delivered a box of the hottest mustard procurable for money, he departed to blow up Mac, that being his next duty in his opinion. He did it so energetically and thoroughly that the poor worm was cast into the depths of remorseful despair, and went to bed that evening feeling that he was an outcast from among men and bore the mark of Cain upon his brow. Thanks to the skill of the doctor and the devotion of his helpers, Rose grew easier about midnight, and all hoped that the worst was over. Phoebe was making tea by the study fire, for the doctor had forgotten to eat and drink since Rose was ill, and Aunt Plenty insisted on his having a good cordial dish of tea after his exertions. A tap on the window startled Phoebe, and looking up she saw a face peering in. She was not afraid, for a second look showed her that it was neither ghost nor burglar, but Mac, looking pale and wild in the wintry moonlight. "Come and let a fellow in," he said in a low tone, and when he stood in the hall, he clutched Phoebe's arm, whispering gruffly, "How is Rose?" "Thanks be to goodness, she's better," answered Phoebe, with a smile that was like broad sunshine to the poor lad. "And she will be all right again tomorrow." "Oh dear, no. Debbie says she's sure to have rheumatic fever if she doesn't have pneumonia," answered Phoebe, careful to pronounce the word right this time. Down went Mac's face, and remorse began to gnaw at him again, as he gave a great sign and said rather doubtfully, "I suppose I couldn't see her." "Of course, not at this time of night when we want her to go to sleep." Mac opened his mouth to say something more, when a sneeze came upon him unawares. A rash "hoo" awoke the echoes of the quiet house. "Why didn't you stop it?" said Phoebe reproachfully. "I dare say you've waked her up." "Didn't know it was coming. Just my luck," groaned Mac, turning to go before his unfortunate presence did more harm. But a voice from the stairhead called softly, "Mac, come up. Rose wants to see you." Up he went and found his uncle waiting for him. "What brings you here at this hour, my boy?" asked the doctor in a whisper. "Charlie said it was all my fault, and if she died, I'd killed her. I couldn't sleep, so I came to see how she was, and no one knows it but Steve," he said with such a troubled face and voice that the doctor had not the heart to blame him. Before he could say anything more, a feeble voice called, "Mac," and with a hasty, "Stay a minute just to please her, and slip away, for I want her to sleep," the doctor led him into the room. The face on the pillow looked very pale and childish, and the smile that welcomed Mac was very faint, for Rose was spent with pain, yet could not rest till she had said a word of comfort to her cousin. "I knew your funny sneeze, and I guessed that you came to see how I did, though it is very late. Don't be worried, I'm better now, and it is my fault I was ill, not yours, for I needn't have been so silly as to wait in the cold." Mac hastened to explain, to load himself with reproaches, and to beg her not to die on any account, for Charlie's lecture had made a deep impression on the poor boy's mind. "I didn't know there was any danger of my dying," and Rose looked at him with a solemn expression. "Oh, I hope not. but people do sometimes go suddenly, you know, and I couldn't rest till I'd asked you to forgive me," faltered Mac, thinking that Rose looked very like an angel already, with the golden hair loose on the pillow and the meekness of suffering on her little white face. "I don't think I shall die. Uncle won't let me, but if I do, remember I forgave you." She looked at him with a tender light in her eyes, and seeing how pathetic his dumb grief was, she added softly, drawing his head down, "I wouldn't kiss you under the mistletoe, but I will now, for I want you to be sure I do forgive and love you just the same." Chapter 22. Something to do. Whatever danger there might have been from the effects of that sudden chill was soon over, though of course Aunt Myra refused to believe it, and Dr. Alec cherished his girl with redoubled vigilance and tenderness for months afterward. Rose quite enjoyed being sick, because as soon as the pain ended, the fun began, and for a week or two she led the life of a little princess, secluded in the bower, while everyone served, amused, and watched over her in the most delightful manner. But the doctor was called away to see an old friend who was dangerously ill, and then Rose felt like a young bird deprived of its mother's sheltering wing on one afternoon when the aunts were taking their naps, and the house was very still within, while outdoors the snow was softly falling. "I'll go and hunt up Phoebe. She is always nice and busy and likes to have me help her. If Debbie is out of the way, we can make caramels and surprise the boys when they come," Rose said to herself as she threw down her book and felt ready for society of some sort. She took the precaution to peep through the slide before she entered the kitchen, for Debbie allowed no messing when she was round. But the coast was clear, and no one but Phoebe appeared, sitting at the table with her head on her arms, apparently asleep. Rose was just about to wake her with a boo when she lifted her head, dried her wet eyes with her blue apron, and fell to work with a resolute face on something she was evidently much interested in. Rose could not make out what it was, and her curiosity was greatly excited, for Phoebe was writing with a sputtering pen on some bits of brown paper, apparently copying something from a little book. "I must know what the dear thing is about, and why she cried," thought Rose, forgetting all about the caramels, and going round to the door, she entered the kitchen, saying pleasantly, "Phoebe, I want something to do. Can't you let me help you about anything, or shall I be in the way?" "Oh dear, no miss. I always love to have you round when things are tidy. What would you like to do?" answered Phoebe, opening a drawer as if about to sweep her own affairs out of sight. But Rose stopped her, exclaiming like a curious child, "Let me see, what is it? I won't tell if you'd rather not have Debbie know." "I'm only trying to study a bit, but I'm so stupid I don't get on much," answered the girl reluctantly, permitting her little mistress to examining what she was trying to work with. A broken slate that had blown off the roof, an inch or two of pencil, an old almanac for a reader, several bits of brown or yellow paper ironed smoothly and sewed together for a copybook, and the copy's sundry receipts written in Aunt Plenty's neat hand. These, with a small bottle of ink and a rusty pen, made up Phoebe's outfit, and it was little wonder that she did not get on in spite of the patient persistence that dried the desponding tears and drove along the sputtering pen with a will. "You may laugh if you want to, Miss Rose. I know my things are queer, and that's why I hide 'em. But I don't mind since you've found me out, and I ain't a bit ashamed. except of being so backward at my age," said Phoebe humbly, though her cheeks grew redder as she washed out some crooked capitals with a tear not yet dried upon the slate. "Laugh at you. I feel more like crying to think what a selfish girl I am, to have loads of books and things and never remember to give you some. Why didn't you come and ask me and not go struggling along alone in this way? It was very wrong of you, Phoebe, and I'll never forgive you if you do so again," answered Rose with one hand on Phoebe's shoulder, while the other gently turned the leaves of the poor little copybook. "I didn't like to ask for anything more when you were so good to me all the time, miss," began Phoebe, looking up with grateful eyes. "Oh, you proud thing, just as if it wasn't fun to give away, and I had the best of it. Now see here, I've got a plan, and you mustn't say no, or I shall scold. I want something to do, and I'm going to teach you all I know. It won't take long," and Rose laughed as she put her arm around Phoebe's neck and patted the smooth dark head with the kind little hand that so loved to give. "It would be just heavenly," said Phoebe, and Phoebe's face shone at the mere idea, but it fell again as she added wistfully, "Only I'm afraid I ought not to let you do it, Miss Rose. It would take time, and maybe the doctor wouldn't like it." "He didn't want me to study much, but he never said a word about teaching, and I don't believe he will mind a bit. Anyway, we can try it till he comes. So pack up your things and go right to my room, and we'll begin this very day. I'd truly like to do it, and we'll have nice times, see if we don't," cried Rose eagerly. It was a pretty sight to see Phoebe bundle her humble outfit into her apron and spring up as if the desire of her heart had suddenly been made a happy fact to her. It was still a prettier sight to see Rose run gaily on before, smiling like a good fairy as she beckoned to the other, singing as she went, "The way into my parlour is up a winding stair, and many are the curious things I'll show you when you're there. Will you walk in, Phoebe dear?" "Oh, won't I?" answered Phoebe fervently as they entered the bower. "You are the dearest spider that ever was, and I'm the happiest fly." "I'm going to be very strict, so sit down in that chair and don't say a word till school is ready to open," ordered Rose, delighted with the prospect of such a useful and pleasant something to do. So Phoebe sat demurely in her place, while her new teacher laid forth books and slates, a pretty inkstand and a little globe. Then she hastily tore a bit off her big sponge, sharpened pencils with more energy than skill, and when all was ready, gave a prance of satisfaction that set the pupil laughing. "Now the school is open, and I shall hear you read, so that I may know in which class to put you, Miss Moore," began Rose with great dignity, as she laid before her scholar and sat down in the easy chair. Phoebe did pretty well, only tripping now and then over a hard word, and pronouncing identical, in a sober way that tickled Rose, though never a smile betrayed her. The spelling lesson which followed was rather discouraging. Phoebe's ideas of geography were very vague, and grammar was nowhere, though the pupil protested that she tried so hard to talk nice like educated folks that Debbie called her a stuck-up piece who didn't know her place. "Debbie's an old goose, so don't you mind her. You do talk very nicely, Phoebe. I've observed it, and grammar will help you and show why some things are right and others ain't. Well, are not, I mean," added Rose, correcting herself and feeling that she must mind her own parts of speech if she was to serve as an example for Phoebe. When the arithmetic came, the little teacher was surprised to find her scholar quicker in some things than herself, for Phoebe had worked away at the columns in the butcher's and baker's books, till she could add so quickly and correctly that Rose was amazed, and felt that in this branch the pupil would soon excel the teacher, if she kept on at this same fine pace. Her praise cheered Phoebe immensely, and they worked on, both getting so interested that time flew unheeded until Aunt Plenty appeared, exclaiming as she stared at the two heads bent over one slate, "Bless my heart, what is going on now?" "School, Auntie. I'm teaching Phoebe and it's great fun," cried Rose, looking up with a bright face. But Phoebe's was brighter, though she added with a wistful look, "Maybe I ought to have asked leave first. Only when Miss Rose proposed this, I was so happy I forgot to. Shall I stop, ma'am?" "Of course not, child. I'm so glad to see you fond of your book, and to find Rose helping you along. My blessed mother used to sit at work with her maids about her, teaching them many a useful thing. Only don't neglect your work, dear, or let the books interfere with the duties." As Aunt Plenty spoke with her kind old face beaming approvingly on the girls, Phoebe glanced at the clock, saw that it pointed to 5, knew that Debbie would soon be down, expecting to find preparations for supper underway, and hastily dropping her pencil, she jumped up, saying, "Please, can I go? I'll clear up after I've done my chores." "School is dismissed," answered Rose, and with a grateful "Thank you heaps and heaps," Phoebe ran away singing the multiplication table as she set the tea table. That was the way it began, and for a week the class of 1 went on with great pleasure and profit to all concerned, for the pupil proved a bright one and came to her lessons as to a feast, while the young teacher did her best to be worthy the high opinion held of her, for Phoebe firmly believed that Miss Rose knew everything in the way of learning. Rose herself had some doubts as to how it would strike her uncle, and concocted a wheedlesome speech which should at once convince him that it was the most useful, wholesome and delightful plan ever devised. But she got no chance to deliver her address, for Dr. Alec came upon her so unexpectedly that it went out of her head entirely. She was sitting on the floor in the library, poring over a big book laid open in her lap, and knew nothing of the long-desired arrival till 2 large warm hands met under her chin and gently turned her head back so that someone could kiss her heartily on either cheek, while a fatherly voice said, half reproachfully, "Why is my girl brooding over a dusty encyclopedia when she ought to be running to meet the old gentleman who couldn't get on another minute without her?" "Oh, Uncle, I'm so glad and so sorry. Why didn't you let us know what time you would be here, or call out the minute you came? Haven't I been homesick for you? And now I'm so happy to have you back. I could hug your dear old curly head off," cried Rose, as the encyclopedia went down with a bang and she up with a spring that carried her into Dr. Alec's arms, to be kept there in the sort of embrace a man gives to the dearest creature the world holds for him. Presently he was in his easy chair with Rose upon his knee, smiling up in his face and talking as fast as her tongue could go, while he watched her with an expression of supreme content as he stroked the smooth round cheek or held the little hand in his, rejoicing to see how rosy was the one, how plump and strong the other. "Have you had a good time? Did you save the poor lady? Aren't you glad to be home again with your girl to torment you all the time?" Yes, to all those questions. Now tell me what you've been at. Aunt Plen says you want to consult me about some new and remarkable project which you have dared to start in my absence. She didn't tell you, I hope? Not a word, more except that you were rather doubtful how I'd take it, and so wanted to fess yourself and get round me as you always try to do. Though you don't often succeed, now then, hone up and take the consequences. So Rose told about her school in her pretty earnest way, dwelling on Phoebe's hunger for knowledge and the delight it was to help her, adding with a wise nod, "And it helps me too, Uncle, for she is quick and eager, and I have to do my best, or she will get ahead of me in some things. Today now she had the word cotton in a lesson and asked all about it, and I was ashamed to find I really knew so little that I could only say that it was a plant that grew down south in a kind of pod and was made into cloth. That's what I was reading up when you came, and tomorrow I shall tell her all about it, and indigo too. So you see, it teaches me also, and is as good as a general review of what I've learned in a pleasanter way than going over it alone." You artful little baggage. That's the way you expect to get round me, is it? That's not studying, I suppose. No, sir, it's teaching, and please, I like it much better than having a good time all by myself. Besides, you know, I adopted Phoebe and promised to be a sister to her, so I am bound to keep my word, am I not? Answered Rose, looking both anxious and resolute as she waited for her sentence. Dr. Alec was evidently already won, for Rose had described the old slate and brown paper copybook with pathetic effect, and the excellent man had not only decided to send Phoebe to school long before the story was done, but reproached himself for forgetting his duty to one little girl in his love for another. So when Rose tried to look meek and failed utterly, he laughed and pinched her cheek and answered in that genial way which adds such warmth and grace to any favour. "I haven't the slightest objection in the world. In fact, I was beginning to think I might let you go at your books again moderately, and this is an excellent way to try your powers. Phoebe is a brave, bright lass, and shall have a fair chance in the world if we can give it to her, so that if she ever finds her friends, they need not be ashamed of her." "I think she has found some already," began Rose eagerly. "Hey, what? Has anyone turned up since I've been gone?" asked Dr. Alec quickly, for it was a firm belief in the family that Phoebe would prove to be somebody sooner or later. "No, her best friend turned up when you came home, Uncle," answered Rose with an approving pat, adding gratefully, "I can't half thank you for being so good to my girl, but she will, because I know she is going to make a woman to be proud of. She's so strong and true and loving." "Bless your dear heart. I haven't begun to do anything yet. More shame to me. But I'm going at it now, and as soon as she gets on a bit, she shall go to school as long as she likes. How will that do for a beginning?" "It will be just heavenly, as Phoebe says, for it is the wish of her life to get lots of schooling, and she will be too happy when I tell her. May I please? It will be so lovely to see the dear thing open her big eyes and clap her hands at the splendid news." "No one shall have a finger in this nice little pie. You shall do it all yourself. Only don't go too fast, or make too many castles in the air, my dear, for time and patience must go into this pie of ours if it is to turn out well." "Yes, Uncle, only when it is opened won't the birds begin to sing," laughed Rose, taking a turn about the room as a vent for the joyful emotions that made her eyes shine. All of a sudden she stopped and asked soberly, If Phoebe goes to school, who will do her work? I'm willing, if I can. Come here and I'll tell you a secret. Debbie's bones are getting so troublesome and her dear old temper so bad that the aunts have decided to pension her off and let her go and live with her daughter, who was married very well. I saw her this week and should like to have her mother come. So in the spring we shall have a grand change and get a new cook and chamber girl if anyone can be found to suit our honoured relatives. Oh me, how can I ever get on without Phoebe? Couldn't she stay, just so I could see her? I'd pay her board, rather than have her go. I'm so fond of her. How Dr. Alec laughed at that proposal, and how satisfied Rose was when he explained that Phoebe was still to be her maid, with no duties except such as she could easily perform between school hours. She is a proud creature for all her humble ways, and even from us would not take a favour if she did not earn it somehow. So this arrangement makes it all square and comfortable, you see, and she will pay for the schooling by curling these Goldilocks a dozen times a day if you let her. Your plans are always so wise and kind. That's why they work so well, I suppose, and why people let you do what you like with them. I really don't see how other girls get along without an Uncle Alec, answered Rose, with a sigh of pity for those who had missed so great a blessing. When Phoebe was told the splendid news, she did not stand on her head with a rapture, as Charlie prophesied she would, but took it quietly, because it was such a happy thing that she had no words big and beautiful enough to thank them in. But every hour of her day was brightened by this granted wish, and dedicated to the service of those who gave it.